What kind of interview questions specifically for front-end engineer people can expect?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Well, I mean, yeah, there's plenty. Like literally, you know, you could go wild.
Which surprised you, right? Like which question surprised you? Like because you're a seasoned guy, and I mean, sometimes even like everyone has confidence and moments of, you know, when imposter syndrome knocking your door, and you're like, oh, and some companies can compromise. This like, you know, feeling that you know a lot of stuff, and then they just have a question and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. So do you want to know surprising questions, or do you want to know in general how front-end engineering questions were?
Like which one you prefer to?
Well, I'll tell you, like in general, you know, like because usually people want to know, people have a big question in their head, like how do you prepare for a front-end interview, or what kind of questions would be asked in a front-end interview, and then. The thing that I've noticed, right, even as an interviewer myself, that sometimes I see people who've done a little bit of web development. And when I say web development, it's, you know, just a small changes here and there. HTML and CSS, you know, change some colors, change some style.
Move button 20 pixels for right.
That's right. And, you know, that gets them into the misconception that, all right, this is what front-end engineering is all about. But, you know, that's far from the truth. Front-end engineering is a lot. It's a huge term, and you know it encompasses a lot of stuff, right? And then one of the biggest things that I always tell anyone who comes to me and you know wants to ask a question about like, oh, hey, how do I prepare for front-end engineering? The answer is JavaScript. That's the bottom line. Like you have to really know the language inside out, and of course it depends on like whether you're starting off, you know, as initial, you're looking like an entry level front end engineer, or you're like a little senior role, and you know the questions could probably change depending on that. But definitely, you know, there are questions that can be created in JavaScript that probably sound difficult, but are actually pretty simple.
Can you provide example of this?
Yeah, like the classic example is a classic question is like what is debounce and what is throttle, right? In terms of the front end.
I don't know the answer honestly. Like, I'm like
and
if you would ask me something mobile specific, maybe like I would be able to answer. But like front end, I'm not that. I'm this person who kind of like move button left to right, like you know can hide button, you know, have some business logic in JavaScript and then link it to the HTML file.
And that's totally fine. That's totally fine. And this is why these questions are pretty useful for interviewers in front end interviews, right? Because they kind of help them understand that is the candidate really, you know, played in the UI, right? Has really worked on developing web applications and not just moved elements around, right? Because let's say if you would develop a real application, like, you know, you could follow a simple tutorial, but that tutorial doesn't really cover all the aspects, right? But when you've actually created or worked in a team that's built an enterprise application from the ground up, you will come across almost every scenario that's related to these questions, right? So when I say debounce and throttle, right, it's hard for me to figure out that somebody who's been working in the front end space for about 3 years has never used a debounce or a throttle function, right? You definitely come across the situation where you kind of use it, right?
Probably,
yeah. So simple, right? Debouncing, like what is debouncing? It's pretty simple. It says that, okay, if you are getting a task, and this or this in JavaScript, everything is a function, right? You want to ensure that the function is not called before a certain duration compared to the previous call. Okay.
So it's like you're making dependency between two threads or between two tasks, and you specifying
not the thread itself, but the function call itself. Like you could, there may things happening in the UI that could cause, let's say, a lot of events at the same time.
Okay.
Right. And now you want to probably do something based on the event. Like give you a simple example. Like let's say you have an autocomplete.
Okay.
Right, it's an autocomplete. You are typing A, B, C, or whatever it is, right? And now, when you type a character, you want to make an API call and get the results back, right? Now, let's say you type, 20 characters, right? Now you don't want to make 20 calls. right? So with
I see what you're saying. So once it's stopped, you want to have a pause, like
yes. So once it stops,
3 seconds, 2 seconds.
Exactly. So that's what you do. Now this task of calling the API, you want to debounce it. So you give it to a debounce function.
I see.
All right. And now the debounce function is giving you a debounced version of your task.
Okay.
And what it's ensuring is, let's say the timeout that you give is, let's say 2 seconds.
Okay.
So it's ensuring that until there is a pause of 2 seconds, don't make the call.
Got it. So basically, you're saying that during the front-end interview, interviewer will check what kind of tools person, like during the interview, know, and how deep he know JavaScript, because it will show what kind of problem person solved. So is it like simple problem, or it's like in depth and usage JavaScript? Because like there are a bunch of ways to implement this kind of problem, but in a clean, like pristine ways to use like the bounds for functions.
Yeah, exactly. It shows that you've worked in situations that you've used the right tools and techniques. And also when I would say, all right, if the candidate kind of knows what a debounce function is, because they probably used one from a third-party library like _JS or jQuery, and now I tell them, okay, can you implement your own debounce function?
Oh, this is tough one.
Yeah. Now, and I see that's the thing. Now you think that it's tough, but if you kind of think about it, and if you know JavaScript, like if you know the language, then actually building is pretty easy, right? And this is where concepts come in, like closures. Like closure is very important to as a front-end engineer. You need to understand what a closure is, and all of these functions utilize closures. Okay. So when I say, all right, or whenever you ask, okay, can you implement a debounce function? You have to use a closure. Now this closure basically tracks, is there a timeout created? Okay. So you make the first call and you create a timeout to say, all right, the actual function will be called in 2 seconds. Now when you call it the second time, right, it's pretty simple. Just cancel you just cancel the previous timeout.
Nullify
and reset the timeout. That's it, right? And what's the closure doing here? The closure is now keeping track of this timeout. So this closure is bound to your debounce function. It's not a global variable. So this is how some more advanced concepts come in, where like, all right, you're achieving some encapsulation in JavaScript within this function using a closure variable.
Nice. Yeah. I have kind of like a couple of ways to implement it. So I would just take a timestamp first, and we'll check it with each event. Is it like 2 seconds, and just reset it. So yeah.
See, you don't even need to check the timestamp. Actually, that was going to be my next question, which is called throttling.
Oh, okay.
Right. Now, where throttling is slightly different than debounce. Where debounce says that you want to ensure that 2 seconds to the previous call. Okay. But throttle says, okay, if you're getting n number of calls, just execute a call every 2 seconds.
Okay.
So you keep calling, but it will only execute once every 2 seconds. Now that's where you gotta maintain your timestamp, right? So you maintain your timestamp with the last time it was called, right? And now it's a new call, and now you check what is the difference between your timeout and the current time, and then you reschedule it for such that it only executes after the 2 second window is complete. So a little more complicated than debounce, but definitely again test.
I actually think that this the throttling tool is really useful when, for example, backend send you like 500 error code. So then like I'm down, and you don't want to make it harder for servers. So you kind of say like, okay, now make a call every 30 seconds until like retry until you will have 200.
Yeah, and the source is actually coming from more UI events that generate a lot of events. Like for example, if you do an event listener, let's say if you're tracking the movement of the mouse.
Yeah. Okay.
Now if you track the movement of the mouse going from point A to point B, the number of times it's going to be called is huge.
Every point, every scroll point.
Probably every pixel. I don't think there's a definite number to how many times it's going to call it.
Every point.
Probably every point, right? But now if you have like some kind of a function that's executing at every point, you're gonna heat up your browser is going to be killed, right? So this is where throttle comes in. It's like, all right, it's calling you many times, but you're going to execute it only once every probably 100 milliseconds or once every 200 milliseconds.
Half of the second fraction.
Right. It depends on that. So it's very useful. So these are tools that are going to help you as a front-end engineer, right?
But the people they're gonna like the company is gonna ask you about these particular tools all of the time, back and forth, and that are these tools depends on what company use, or it's just general amount of tools?
It's general.
Okay, so
It's general. And like I said, like deep bouncing and throttling, you have to do it because you will come into a situation where you want to, you're scrolling the page. You want to do something when you scroll the page, right? It's the same thing. When you scroll, it's going to fire the event so many times, right? So you want to execute your logic only after a certain interval of time. So it's pretty generic.
Okay, so looks like for front end engineering, you need to like pass the interview for front end, like JavaScript, right? Like specifically.